Have you ever found yourself scrolling through Facebook, looking at pictures of family, old classmates, or maybe reading the news, and suddenly, you feel a little empty? A little more alone than before you picked up the phone? If you're over 70, you're not the only one. Social media, for all its promises of connection, has become a double-edged sword for many seniors. And today, we're going to talk about how it might be quietly affecting your mental health in ways you never expected. But before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Do you feel that social media has made your life better or worse over the past few years? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more thoughtful, honest conversations about life after 60. Now, this isn't just another video blaming technology. We're not here to point fingers. We're here to reflect, to understand, and to share the kind of wisdom that only comes with age. Because when you've lived through wars, raised children, and seen the world change before your eyes, you deserve a space where your experiences matter. And today, that space is right here. Let's take a closer look at the hidden impact of social media on the mental well-being of people over 70. You might be surprised at what we uncover. Shall we begin? Number 1. The story of Harold and the loneliness behind the screen. Harold is 74, lives alone in Arizona. Lost his wife to cancer 5 years ago. His kids are grown, busy with their own lives. On most days, Harold's house is quiet, too quiet. So, like many of us, he turned to Facebook. At first, it felt like a lifeline. Photos from the grandkids, updates from neighbors, even some old army buddies from the 60s. It felt like connection. But over time, something changed. Harold started noticing things. Family vacations he wasn't invited to, birthday parties he didn't know about until he saw the photos. No one meant to hurt him, of course, but the feeling crept in anyway. That he was being left behind. That life was moving on, and he was just watching from the outside. He'd scroll for hours sometimes, thinking he was staying in the loop, but he'd close the app feeling lonelier than when he started. The more he saw, the more invisible he felt. And Harold isn't alone. Studies have shown that while social media can reduce isolation for some, it can actually increase feelings of loneliness for others, especially in older adults living alone. Why? Because what we see online often doesn't match what we feel inside. It's a highlight reel. And when you compare that to your everyday reality, it can feel like your own life is fading. So let me ask you, have you ever felt lonelier after spending time on social media? Be honest. Drop a comment and let's talk about it. You'd be surprised how many people feel the same. And if Harold's story feels a little too familiar, stay with me. There's more to uncover. Number 2. A day in your shoes, when connection isn't connection at all. Picture this. It's a Sunday morning. The coffee's warm, the house is still. You sit in your favorite chair, pick up your phone, and open Facebook. A notification lights up. Your granddaughter posted a new photo. You tap it, and there she is, at her college graduation, beaming, surrounded by friends. You smile, of course you do, but then it hits you. You didn't even know the ceremony was this weekend. You scroll a little more. Your neighbor just got back from a cruise, your old friend from church moved in with her daughter, someone's celebrating their 50th anniversary with a big family dinner. And you? You're sitting here alone, reading about it all secondhand. No voices, no laughter, just a screen. This is the kind of connection social media often offers. It feels like you're part of something, but more often than not, it reminds you of what you're missing. Especially after 70, when the pace of life slows down and relationships start to thin out, these moments can hurt more than we realize. And here's the hard truth. Digital connection isn't the same as human connection. A like isn't a conversation. A comment isn't a hug. Scrolling isn't visiting. Psychologists call this the social comparison trap. You see other people's lives, edited and filtered, and without even meaning to, you start measuring your life against theirs. That comparison can lead to sadness, irritability, even depression, especially in older adults who are already navigating loneliness, grief, or physical limitations. But here's a thought. What if we used social media differently? What if, instead of just scrolling, we actually reached out, called someone, wrote a letter, invited a friend for coffee? Real connection, not just digital noise. Have you ever caught yourself falling into this kind of routine, where you thought you were connecting, but felt more alone than ever? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. Stick around. We're just getting started. Number 3, the shocking numbers no one talks about. Let's take a moment to step back from stories and look at something harder to ignore. Facts. Numbers. Real data. Because sometimes, the truth is clearer in black and white. According to a 2023 study from the University of Michigan's National Poll on Healthy Aging, more than 1 in 3 adults aged 65 and older who use social media report feeling more isolated after using it. And here's the part that really makes you stop. Over 40% of seniors in that same group said they felt left out when browsing social platforms. Think about that. These are people who turned to social media hoping to feel more connected, but nearly half of them walked away feeling excluded instead. It gets more serious. A 2022 review in the Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry found a strong correlation between excessive social media use and symptoms of depression among seniors, particularly those living alone or recently retired. Not because the platforms are inherently evil, but because they often replace deeper, more meaningful forms of engagement, like in-person conversations, phone calls, or community involvement. And it's not just about feelings. These emotional shifts can have real consequences. Seniors experiencing chronic loneliness have a 50% higher risk of developing dementia. They're also more likely to face heart disease, mobility issues, and even early mortality. Yes, that's how serious it is. So what do we do with these numbers? We talk about them. We stop pretending everything is fine when we feel something's off. And we look out for each other, because behind every cheerful post is a person who might be struggling. Have these stats surprised you? Or have you felt it yourself, even before reading the numbers? I want to know. Leave a comment. Share what's been on your heart. Let's not let silence win. Up next, we'll dive into what's actually happening inside our brains when we scroll and why it matters more than you think. Number 4. What happens in the brain when we scroll? Let's get into the science of it. Because behind every feeling of sadness or loneliness you get after scrolling social media, there's something happening deep inside your brain. And understanding it might just give you the power to change it. When you open up your phone and start scrolling, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or even YouTube, your brain kicks into what psychologists call the dopamine cycle. Dopamine is the brain's feel-good chemical. Every time you get a notification, a like, or a new photo of the grandkids, your brain gives you a little burst of pleasure. But here's the catch. That pleasure is short-lived, and the more we rely on it, the more we need it just to feel okay. Over time, this constant chasing of small rewards, clicking, scrolling, refreshing, can actually exhaust your brain. Especially in older adults, where natural dopamine levels are already lower with age, the up and down of digital rewards can lead to emotional fatigue. That means more mood swings, more irritability, and yes, more feelings of depression. Even more concerning, studies using brain scans have shown that prolonged exposure to curated social media content, like seeing only the best moments of other people's lives, activates parts of the brain linked to comparison and self-worth. And when you're over 70, living with loss, retirement, or physical changes, that comparison hits even harder. You might start questioning your value, your purpose, even your identity. But here's the hopeful part. Knowing this gives you a choice. When you realize how these platforms are wired to keep you chasing little highs, you can step back and ask, is this really bringing me joy, or just filling the silence? The brain is powerful, but so is your wisdom. You've lived long enough to know when something doesn't sit right. So trust that feeling. Give yourself permission to pause, to reflect, and to reconnect in ways that nourish you, not drain you. Have you ever felt more anxious or emotionally drained after spending time online? Leave a comment and share what goes through your mind when you're scrolling. You're not alone, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Now, let's look at what life could look like when we step away from the scroll. Number 5. 2 lives, 2 paths, a tale of contrast. Imagine 2 mornings. In the first, Margaret, 76, wakes up, pours herself a cup of coffee, and sits in front of her tablet. She opens Facebook, just like she does every day. She scrolls for an hour, maybe more, sees family pictures, political arguments, vacation posts from people she barely remembers. She chuckles at a few things, but mostly, she just watches. She doesn't comment, doesn't message, and when she puts the tablet down, the house feels even quieter than before. In the second morning, we meet Rosa. She's also 76. Lives just a few blocks from Margaret. Rosa wakes up, makes her coffee, and instead of grabbing her tablet, she picks up the phone. She calls her church friend. They talk about the book they're reading. Later, she heads to the senior center for a painting class. She's not the best painter, but it's not about the art. It's about the laughs, the voices, the feeling of being seen. Both women are the same age. Both are widowed. Both live alone. But one is slowly drifting into digital isolation, while the other is building something real, something solid. That's the power of choice. Social media isn't evil, but it can quietly pull us into a version of life where watching replaces doing and scrolling replaces living. Especially after 70, when every day is a precious gift, we must ask ourselves, what kind of life do I want to live? Now I'd love to hear from you. Which of these two mornings feels more familiar to you? Be honest. Leave a comment, and let's open up a space where no one feels judged, only understood. In just a moment, we'll wrap up this video. But before we do, let's bring everything together. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you. Truly. Because these conversations aren't always easy. Looking at the impact of social media on our mental health, especially after 70, takes honesty, courage, and the willingness to ask hard questions. We've talked about Harold's quiet loneliness behind the screen. We've stepped into your shoes on a Sunday morning. We've looked at the numbers, the science, and the subtle ways scrolling can reshape our emotions and our sense of self. And we saw, through Margaret and Rosa, just how different our lives can feel, based on where we choose to put our attention. But this isn't about guilt. It's about awareness, about taking back control. You've lived through too much, seen too many sunrises, to let a screen define your worth or steal your peace. So the next time you reach for your phone, just pause. Ask yourself, is this lifting me up or quietly weighing me down? If it's the second, maybe it's time for a walk, a phone call, or even just sitting in the sunlight for a while. The world out there is still full of life. And so are you. If this video spoke to you, I ask one thing. Leave a comment. Share your story, your thoughts, or even just a hello. You never know who might read it and feel a little less alone. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community here, one that values truth, wisdom, and connection that's real. Because after 70, life doesn't end. It just gets more honest. Until next time, take care of your mind, your heart, and each other.